Okay, this episode of Star Trek Discovery was directed by Jonathan Frakes, so we know that it's going to be action-packed. We'll talk about it in a second. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd, and there's an interesting message in the title of this episode, which is There is a Tide. It's from Shakespeare, it's from Julius Caesar. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted all the voyages of their life, is bound in shadows and in miseries. On such a full sea we are now afloat, and must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures. Essentially what it says is that you have to hit while the iron is hot. We see in this episode the Federation and also the Emerald Chain kind of in decline or past its peak. The Federation has been there for a long time. The Emerald Chain is running very low on dilithium and is not going to be able to continue their operations as they are. And in that is where Osira believes that the only way out of this is to try to make some kind of accord and join the Federation. And interestingly, in the very strict talks that they had between her and Admiral Vance, there's shown that a lot of what Osiris wants is not necessarily criminal. We talked a little about this last week, where we were saying that there is more to her than just evil. She is trying to make do in a universe after the burn. And that is, of course, what Starfleet is trying to do as well, and the Federation as a whole. So we find that in the negotiations where it's found that most of what she's saying is the truth, most of her motivations are in the right place, it does not forgive her for what's happened in her past. She gets in a couple of nice little digs on Admiral Vance, and Admiral Vance gets back a couple of little ones on her. I particularly like the line on just what the things that go into replicators are actually. We've had this suspicion for a long time of what they recycle in order to replicate into food and other things. And they talked about it in the protein resequencers in Enterprise, but in that case they only made clothes and boots and other implements out of that, not food. But they have now made it part of canon of just exactly what replicated food started out as. And it's clever, and it's in one of those situations to where the language which some people have objected to in the series is justified. It's a very frank way of trying to catch Osira kind of off balance, which is all of these negotiations are, what any kind of negotiation is, where you try to get advantage wherever you can in small talk, in explicit negotiating terms, or otherwise. It looks like what they have is something that would be a good start, but certainly it's unrealistic to think that a single session of sit-down is going to achieve the overall goals. I have a feeling that probably the Emerald Chain will be a part of the Federation, but it's going to take a lot more movement in order for that to happen. The same way that it was with the Klingon Empire. There was a lot that the Klingons could offer the Federation, but also a lot that they had to atone for, and that was part of what these negotiations were about. I love the opening to this episode where they do something that is reminiscent of the only good scene in Star Trek V, where they actually ram a shuttle into the shuttle bay. In this case, it's Book's ship, and it causes a few more fires and much more commotion, but still a good effect. A couple of good lines early on too, where as they are deciding what they're going to do, Burnham and Book are about to part, and she says, "Is it the wrong time now to say I love you for the first time?" And he said, "This isn't the first time you talk in your sleep." I thought that was a clever line. But let's move on into what we have as far as the main thrust of the episode. And it is force versus negotiation. One of the lines that Vance gets in pretty well is that when he's trying to get Asira to give something of the emerald chain that they don't want to get rid of, she says that would be very difficult to negotiate out. And the Admiral says, well, why don't you hijack one of their ships and hold them hostage while you negotiate with them? I thought that was a very clever turnaround in the conversation. The second work of all of this is, of course, the subterfuge of getting Discovery back into the hands of its own crew. And we see the beginnings of that. We only see the prep for that really in this episode. The remainder of that will be in the finale. But we see how it's all set up at this point to where we're establishing Tilly as someone who can have a plan, put together an operation, and start it into motion. With Burnham working kind of in the background to free Stamets and to get him out of the way, this is part of that. And then there is the other side of Asira, which is the scientist, Aurello, who is played by an actor by the name of Kenneth Mitchell. Kenneth Mitchell has played a number of character parts in various Star Trek episodes. And in this case, he is playing this scientist, the leading scientist of the Emerald Chain, who is wheelchair bound. And the reason he is because the actor, Kenneth Mitchell, has multiple sclerosis and is confined to a wheelchair at this point. They wanted to use him still for the part, and so what they did was have him act in his wheelchair and then use special effects in order to make it look more futuristic. And in fact, some of that is practical that was actually built for him. And of course, the levitation part of it is special effects. But not the first time that's ever been done. It was done for Ricardo Montalban in Spy Kids 3D. So this is not any new territory that's being traveled. But it's interesting that they will play someone differently abled by someone who is differently abled. I find that to be a pretty good thing there. And the acting was very good. The intensity between someone who sees the good side of what the Emerald Chain has done and someone who has seen the bad side of it and also has so much invested in it with the Doctor and with Adira and with Saru trapped on the planet that is in the radiation nebula. This is all something he wants to be able to get back to, and they can't do that until they resolve this situation, and time, of course, is running out. That's the things that we're dealing with in this episode. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of emotional moments, which, even though you know that our heroes are going to come out all right, put you at the edge of your seats. And it's another very good directing job by Jonathan Frakes. I'd like to know what you think about this and what you would do if you were negotiating with Asira. Do you buy her whole pitch? Do you think that she would have some intention of turning around and trying to take over, or something else? I'd like to see what you say about that. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And until our last episode of Discovery, which we will be covering shortly after it airs, don't go far.